These flowers are called Lycoris Squamigera. But they have so many names, more than I can probably list. I call them surprise lilies, but the second most common name I think is naked ladies. See? No foliage. And other names include spider lady, pink flamingo, resurrection lily, hurricane lily, magic lily, mystery lily, sesame lily, I like that. Pop sesame, August lily, and upstart. They are of the Amaradaceae family, commonly known as the Amaryllis family. The name surprise lily is what I call them mostly, and you can see why, because pop, they just appear almost overnight and surprise you. Some folks call them resurrection lilies, but I call a different kind of lily a resurrection lily, one that they force to bloom around Easter time, and I actually have in my garden that blooms shortly after Easter, and it's usually white. I think people call these resurrection lilies sometimes because they do have sort of the trumpet, but I don't think these to me are official resurrection lilies. So the name Squamigera means bearing scales, and if you just Google that, you'll find this snake with the same name. But it's named this, and I don't know if you can see it, because there are very tiny scales on these petals, and it makes a iridescent sparkle, especially in the sunlight. I can see it with my bare eyes. I'm not sure if you can see it with this camera. And if you ever see these, be sure to get up close and look at that sparkle. These are really fun to take photos of. I love it, blowing in the wind and looking at all the parts. That's going to be tomorrow's bloom. I love when my surprise lilies bloom. They always just surprise me. And they're always so pretty. I have this set here that was transplanted when we put this white fence up. It literally, they dug them up and just threw them aside, and we salvaged them just for my own sake in the garden. Oh, see, there's some still there where the original was. These were where they were originally, and see, these things just like to live. Now we also have them on this side of the house, and I just absolutely love them against the white fence. There's some more down this way. These were all in our yard when we first moved into the house. So what happens with surprise lilies, that's what I call them, is the foliage comes up in the spring and there's no flowers, and it just comes up, and we end up tying it up the same time we tie up our daffodil leaves. They're very similar to the daffodil leaves after they bloom, but these do not bloom in the spring. We usually tie them up with rubber bands and we let them die back, and that is very important, not to mow or kill the leaves in the spring until they die back. So these flowers do the same as other bulbs, but they are very much opposite of the way all the others work. So while they're dying back, the foliage in the spring, they're taking all the nutrients down into the bulb. Whereas like a daffodil, it blooms first, and then when its blooming is done, it takes all of the nutrients down into the flower. These take the nutrients down into the flower in the spring, and then they flower and surprise you in the middle of the summer. And they just come up with no leaves, because the leaves were in the spring, just on these stalks. And they're so pretty. And, you know, after you do your thing in the spring, they're like no maintenance, because when the stalk is done, you can just, you know, cut it off at the ground. Look at all of them. See this one? This one has 2 blooms, and you can see it's going to have more blooms. These 2 will probably bloom tomorrow. They're like short-lived. They only last a week, but I get to really enjoy them. And then so here are the future blooms getting ready to come up. You can see all the parts of a flower. They're really great for learning the parts of the flower, although I don't know my parts of the flower. They're really fun to photograph, and they actually make good cut flowers. See, when I come at them from this angle, they look like they're all bunched together, and they're just a big wad of pretty. These flowers were here in our yard in 1986, and that's when we bought the house, and they've survived ever since. They are some of the most hardy flowers out there. We have dug these up and put them in our flower beds, and I don't recommend the flower beds because you have to let the foliage die back, and we have to spend a lot of time. We rubber band them up, or sometimes we've just laid the foliage flat, and it's rather large, takes up a lot of precious garden space. So they are best, in my opinion, in the way you see them most of the time, right in the grass, either on the edge of a lawn like this one is, or sometimes right out in the middle of the lawn, because you can just let the foliage die back in the spring and then mulch mow over it, and it's gone. And if you do that, they're really not a lot of work. But in garden beds, if you try to maintain your small precious space in garden beds, it's a lot of work. So we have, as I said, put these in garden beds and then tried to dig them up. And just when you think you got every last little bulb, it comes back up with foliage again the next year. And so I can testify that these are super hardy and hard to eradicate once you get them in your yard, but who would want to eradicate them unless they're in your garden beds? Now you can transfer and plant those bulbs. It's pretty easy to remember anytime before the foliage comes up or anytime after the bloom is done blooming. So since in the spring, before the foliage comes up, at least here in Zone 6B in Missouri, they are, the ground is cold. It's cold for us humans to be outside, and the ground is cold and kind of hard. So most people don't transplant them before the foliage comes up in the spring. Most people transplant them in late summer and in the fall.